This is about religion and voodoo. I read this book about religion in America. I found it hard to pass on something called Radiant Truths, subtitled Essential Dispatches, Reports, Confessions, and Other Essays on American Belief. I was hooked on that American belief, and the rest of the subtitle is there because the book is not just about religion in America. It was a study or representation of journalistic accounts of religion. What surprised me most about the book was how little it interested me. It got off to a solid start with a piece by Walt Whitman, his account of caring for soldiers who had been wounded in the Civil War. Wounds then were terrible things, often fatal because the bullets and pieces of shrapnel were so big, and the medicine of the time was inadequate in its treatment of infection. So very often the soldier died or suffered amputation or both. Whitman had to witness some terrible, not radiant truths. Here is one. You can love the ones you care for, and they still die. You love them to death. There are others, Twain from The Innocents Abroad, a famous piece by Mencken about holy rollers quaking in a forest nearby the Scopes monkey trial. James Baldwin was in there sitting down to discuss the White Devil with Elijah Muhammad in his mansion in Chicago. Jane Addams writes about the devil baby at Hull House and why so many people were convinced it was real, even when they were told emphatically that it was not. In fact, the more emphatically it was denied, the more some people believed it was real. Fake news, alive and well in 1916. There were socialist tracts, and socialism is a religious fervor for those in its grip, no doubt. There is Gary Wills stalking about Whittier Quaker grounds and finding not the ghost of Nixon, but traces of him, suggestions of the youth who would become that oh so imperfect and very public man. There is Roman Catholicism and religions that were born on the other side of the planet, only recently touching down in this country, barely taking root. Of course, there is a report about snake handlers, rather surprisingly and absurdly devoid of snakes. I have heard enough about them myself. They seem to me forlorn characters who have latched onto this practice not so much as a belief as a way to a deity as to attract attention and gain status, much lower, more profane aims than most religions profess. And there are young believers who gather for a music festival dedicated to the cheese that is Christian rock. They can have their cake and eat it too, in that they can be devoted followers who can act for this weekend rebelliously. Yahoo! All of that is mostly what did not interest me. But why I am writing this is that something bothered me about the book, and I didn't know what it was until I checked back into the table of contents and found it there. A report from Zora Neale Hurston in 1935 on hoodoo, which is what voodoo was called then, in New Orleans. The editor of the book loved this piece. I'm tempted to end this parade of tales here with this story, he wrote in his introduction, adding that it came from what he called her underrated masterpiece, Mules and Men. Hurston appeals to several of the locals to teach her the rites, rituals, and practices of hoodoo. Rebuffed, she finally finds a man named Turner who agrees, with reluctance, to do so. He tells her the tradition from a talking rattlesnake and the power of hoodoo. Police come to try and stop it, but they are easily repulsed. White folks think it's nothing more than an interesting ceremony and dance, but believers know there is magic and miracles, control over the powers of nature. There are also potions and strange concoctions which cause damnation and trouble for your enemy, curses which bring suffering and death, animal sacrifices and blood which bring vengeance. People come and pay the hoodoo priest to cure their ills and poison their enemies. Hurston undergoes the training and rites to become a priest. And this is what upsets me. Religion used as a weapon, the power of darkness, perversion of the Holy Spirit. Voodoo is what we call terrorism, plain and simple. It's car bombs and driving trucks into crowds. It's like those guys who play with the snakes.